She trusted him like a father. She called him when she needed advice, when she felt lost, when the world seemed too heavy to carry alone. He was the one person in her family who always picked up the phone, who always had time, who always said the right things. Until one night, everything changed. One night that trust was shattered forever. And what happened next would leave scars that no one could see, wounds that would take years to even begin to heal. This is Evelyn's story. A story about family, about trust, about the kind of betrayal that breaks you from the inside out. Before we continue, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because every single week, we share real stories like this one, stories that open eyes, stories that might just save a life. Now, let's talk about Evelyn. Evelyn Matthews was 22 years old when her life took a turn she never saw coming. She was the kind of young woman everyone seemed to love. Warm, hopeful, always ready with a smile even when things got hard. She worked at a local bookstore in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Portland, and she loved her job, loved the smell of old pages, loved recommending books to customers who walked in looking for something to make them feel less alone. Evelyn had always been close to her family. Her mother, Claire, was a nurse who worked long shifts at the hospital. Her father had passed away when Evelyn was just 16, a heart attack that came without warning, and the loss had hit their family like a freight train. After that, everything changed. Claire had to work more hours to keep them afloat, and Evelyn, being the eldest of 3, stepped up to help raise her younger siblings, Maya and Jasper. It wasn't easy, but they managed. They always managed. And through it all, there was one person who never let them feel alone. Uncle Thompson. Thompson Reed was Claire's older brother, and he had been a constant presence in Evelyn's life since she was a little girl. He was the kind of man people described as dependable, solid, the rock of the family. He had a steady job as a construction manager, owned his own home, and never missed a family gathering. When Evelyn's father died, Thompson stepped in without hesitation. He helped with bills, drove the kids to school when Claire couldn't, showed up for birthdays and graduations with gifts and encouragement. Evelyn adored him. She looked up to him in a way she never looked up to anyone else, not even her own father, if she was being honest. Thompson just had this way about him, this confidence, this sense that everything would be okay as long as he was around. So when Evelyn found out she was pregnant at 22, unmarried and terrified, Thompson was the first person she called. Her boyfriend Marcus had left the moment she told him, just walked out of her apartment and never came back. Evelyn was devastated, scared, didn't know how she was going to tell her mother, didn't know how she was going to manage raising a baby on a bookstore salary. But Thompson, he told her it would all be okay. He told her she could move in with him for a while, just until she got back on her feet. He had an extra room, he said, and he'd be happy to help. Claire thought it was a wonderful idea. She was working double shifts and didn't have the time or energy to support Evelyn the way she needed. So within a week, Evelyn packed up her things and moved into Thompson's house, a modest 2-story home on the edge of town, surrounded by tall trees and silence. At first, everything seemed normal. Thompson was as kind and supportive as he'd always been. He made sure Evelyn had everything she needed, set up the spare bedroom with a fresh coat of paint and new curtains, even built a small bookshelf for her growing collection of baby books. He'd cook dinner for them every night, and they'd sit at the kitchen table and talk about her day, about the baby, about her plans for the future. It felt safe. It felt like family. But then, little things started to change. It was subtle at first, so subtle that Evelyn didn't even notice right away. Thompson started asking more questions, personal questions, questions about Marcus, about her relationship, about her body. He'd ask if she was feeling okay, if her pregnancy was making her uncomfortable, if she needed help with anything at all. Evelyn thought he was just being caring, just being the concerned uncle he'd always been. But there was something in the way he asked, something in the way his eyes lingered a little too long when she walked past him in the hallway. She told herself she was imagining it, that pregnancy hormones were making her paranoid. Then came the comments. Little jokes, little remarks that made Evelyn's skin crawl, but that she couldn't quite put her finger on. He'd say things like, "You're glowing, you know that." "Evelyn, you've always been the prettiest girl in the family." Or, "Marcus was a fool to leave you, any man would be lucky to have you." At first, Evelyn laughed them off, said thank you, tried not to think too much about it. But the comments kept coming, and they kept getting more uncomfortable. One night, Evelyn was in the kitchen making herself a cup of tea, and Thompson came up behind her, stood so close she could feel the heat of his body against her back. He reached over her shoulder to grab a mug from the cabinet, his arm brushing against hers, and he whispered, "You smell nice, Evie." Evelyn froze. Her heart started pounding, her hands trembling as she poured the hot water. She didn't say anything, just grabbed her tea and went straight to her room, locked the door behind her. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall, trying to convince herself that it was nothing, that she was overreacting, that Thompson was just being friendly. But deep down, she knew. She knew something wasn't right. The isolation started slowly. Thompson began suggesting that Evelyn didn't need to go out as much, that she should rest, take it easy, focus on the baby. He'd offered to pick up anything she needed from the store, told her there was no reason for her to drive all the way into town when he was heading that way anyway. Evelyn appreciated the help, but she started to feel trapped. She stopped seeing her friends as much, stopped going to the bookstore except for her shifts, and even those felt rushed, like she needed to get back to the house before Thompson started worrying. He'd text her throughout the day, asking where she was, what she was doing, when she'd be home. It felt like concern, but it also felt like control. And then there were the touches. Thompson started finding excuses to touch her. A hand on her shoulder when he passed by, a pat on her knee when they sat together on the couch, a hug that lasted just a little too long. Evelyn would pull away, make excuses to leave the room, but he never seemed to notice. Or maybe he did notice and just didn't care. She started wearing baggy clothes, oversized sweaters and sweatpants, anything to cover herself, anything to make herself feel less exposed. She didn't know why she felt the need to do that, didn't want to admit to herself what it meant. One evening, about 3 months into her stay, Evelyn was sitting on the couch reading a book when Thompson sat down next to her, too close, their thighs touching. He put his hand on her leg just above her knee and said, "You know I care about you, right, Evie? I'd do anything for you." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She stared at his hand, at the way his fingers pressed into her skin, and she felt sick. She stood up quickly, mumbled something about needing to use the bathroom, and locked herself in there for 20 minutes, trying to calm down, trying to figure out what to do. But what could she do? Thompson was her uncle. He was letting her live in his house rent-free. He was helping her, supporting her, being there for her when no one else was. Who was she to accuse him of anything? What if she was wrong? What if she was reading too much into things? What if she told her mother and her mother didn't believe her? Evelyn couldn't risk it, so she stayed quiet. She started avoiding Thompson as much as possible, spending most of her time in her room, only coming out for meals, and even then, she'd eat quickly and leave. Thompson noticed. He'd ask if she was okay, if he'd done something to upset her, if she needed to talk about anything. Evelyn would shake her head, force a smile, say she was just tired, just stressed about the baby, and he'd nod, say he understood, say he was there for her whenever she needed him. But the look in his eyes, the way he watched her, the way he always seemed to know where she was in the house, it made her feel like she was being hunted. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, back to Evelyn's story. It happened on a Tuesday night in late October. Evelyn would remember that detail forever. The way the leaves outside had just started to turn brown, the way the air smelled like rain and wood smoke. Her mother had called earlier that day to check in, and Evelyn had lied, told her everything was fine, that Thompson was taking great care of her. She didn't know why she lied. Maybe because she still wasn't sure. Maybe because she didn't want to cause problems. Maybe because she was scared of what the truth would mean. Thompson had been drinking that night. Evelyn could smell the whiskey on his breath when he came home from work, could see the glassy look in his eyes. He was in a good mood, laughing, talking loudly about his day, about a project he'd finished, about how proud he was of himself. Evelyn stayed in her room, door closed, headphones on, trying to disappear into her music. But around 10 o'clock, there was a knock on her door. "Evelyn, sweetheart, you awake?" Thompson's voice muffled through the wood. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She didn't answer, hoped he'd think she was asleep, hoped he'd just go away. But the door opened, slowly, and Thompson stepped inside. Evelyn pulled her headphones off, sat up in bed, her heart racing. "I was just going to bed," she said quickly, her voice shaking. Thompson smiled, that same warm smile he'd always had, the one that used to make her feel safe. "I just wanted to check on you," he said, stepping closer. "Make sure you're okay." Evelyn nodded, pulled the blanket up to her chest. "I'm fine, really. I'm just tired." Thompson sat down on the edge of her bed. Evelyn's entire body went rigid. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his tone casual, almost teasing. "Did I do something wrong?" Evelyn shook her head, her throat tight. "No, I've just been tired. Pregnancy stuff." Thompson nodded, but he didn't move. He just sat there, staring at her, and Evelyn could feel the weight of his gaze, could feel the way the air in the room had changed, had become thick and suffocating. Then he reached out, brushed a strand of hair out of her face. "You're so beautiful, Evie," he whispered. Evelyn's breath stopped. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at him in horror. Thompson leaned in closer, his hand moving to her shoulder, his breath hot against her cheek. "I've always thought so," he said softly, "even when you were younger. But now you're a woman." Evelyn wanted to scream, wanted to push him away, wanted to run, wanted to do anything but sit there frozen like a statue. But she couldn't. Her body wouldn't listen. Her mind was screaming, but her body just froze. Thompson's hand moved down her arm, his fingers tracing the curve of her wrist. "I care about you, Evie," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "You know that, right? I've always cared about you." Evelyn finally found her voice, a small, broken whisper. "Please, don't." But Thompson didn't stop. He leaned in, pressed his lips to her forehead, and Evelyn felt like she was going to be sick. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face, and she whispered again, "Please, Uncle Thompson, please stop." For a moment he paused. For a moment, Evelyn thought maybe he'd listen. Maybe he'd realize what he was doing. Maybe he'd stop. But then he kissed her again, on her cheek this time, and his hand moved to her waist, and Evelyn knew. She knew he wasn't going to stop. What happened next, Evelyn would never speak about in detail. Not to her mother, not to her friends, not even to the therapist she'd see years later. Some things are too painful to put into words, too heavy to carry in the open air. All she would ever say is that the man she trusted, the man she loved like a father, took something from her that night that she could never get back. Her sense of safety, her sense of self, her ability to trust anyone ever again. When it was over, Thompson stood up, straightened his shirt, and looked down at her with an expression Evelyn couldn't read. Shame, maybe, or regret, or maybe nothing at all. He opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and said quietly, "Get some sleep, Evie. Evelyn, we'll talk in the morning." And then he was gone. Evelyn lay there in the dark, her body trembling, her mind racing, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She stared at the ceiling, at the shadows moving across the walls, and she thought about running, about grabbing her things and leaving, about calling her mother, about calling the police. But she didn't. She just lay there, frozen, silent, drowning in a pain so deep she didn't know if she'd ever find her way back to the surface. And in that moment, Evelyn learned the cruelest lesson life can teach. Sometimes the monsters aren't strangers, sometimes they're family. The next morning, Evelyn woke up feeling like she was underwater. Everything was muffled, distant, like she was watching her life happen to someone else. She got out of bed slowly, every movement mechanical, every breath deliberate. Her body ached, not just physically, but in a way that went deeper, a way that made her feel like she was breaking apart from the inside. She could hear Thompson in the kitchen, humming to himself, making coffee like it was just another normal day. Evelyn stood in her room for a long time, staring at the door, trying to decide what to do. Part of her wanted to run, to grab her keys and drive as far away as possible. But another part of her, the part that was louder, the part that scared her, told her to stay quiet. Told her that if she said anything, no one would believe her. Told her that it was her fault somehow, that she'd done something to make him think it was okay, that she'd led him on without meaning to. That's what shame does. It convinces you that the worst thing that ever happened to you was somehow your fault. Evelyn walked into the kitchen. Thompson looked up from his coffee, smiled at her like nothing had happened. "Morning, sweetheart," he said brightly. "How'd you sleep?" Evelyn stared at him, her hands shaking. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw something at him, wanted to ask him how he could stand there and act like everything was fine. But instead, she just said, "Fine," in a voice that didn't sound like her own. Thompson nodded, took a sip of his coffee. "Good, good. I was thinking maybe we could go out for breakfast today, just the two of us. What do you think?" Evelyn felt bile rise in her throat. She shook her head. "I'm not hungry." Thompson frowned, concern flickering across his face. "You sure? You need to eat, Evie. For the baby." Evelyn's hand instinctively moved to her stomach, protective, terrified. "I'll eat later," she said, and then she turned and walked back to her room, locked the door behind her, and collapsed on the floor. She stayed in her room for the rest of the day. Thompson knocked a few times, asked if she was okay, offered to bring her food. Evelyn didn't answer. She just sat there on the floor, her back against the door, staring at nothing, trying to understand what had happened, trying to figure out how her life had fallen apart so completely in just one night. The days that followed were a blur. Evelyn went through the motions, woke up, went to work, came home, locked herself in her room. She avoided Thompson as much as possible, but it was hard, living in the same house, sharing the same space. He acted like nothing had happened. He was still kind, still helpful, still the same Uncle Thompson everyone thought he was. And that made it worse, because if he could act so normal, so unbothered, then maybe it really was her fault. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe it wasn't as bad as she thought. Evelyn started to doubt herself, started to question her own memory, her own perception of what had happened. She'd heard stories about women who lied, who made things up, who ruined men's lives with false accusations. What if she was one of them? What if she was remembering it wrong? What if Thompson really had just been trying to comfort her, and she'd misunderstood? The guilt was suffocating. Evelyn felt like she was drowning in it, like it was wrapping around her throat and squeezing tighter every day. She stopped eating as much, stopped sleeping well, started having nightmares that left her gasping for air in the middle of the night. She'd wake up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, and for a moment she'd forget where she was, forget what had happened, and then it would all come crashing back, and she'd bury her face in her pillow and cry until she couldn't breathe. About 2 weeks after that night, Evelyn's mother came to visit. Claire walked into the house with a big smile, carrying a bag of groceries and a new baby blanket she'd picked up at the store. "Evelyn, honey, how are you feeling?" she asked, pulling her daughter into a hug. Evelyn stood there, stiff, her arms at her sides. She wanted to tell her mother everything, wanted to collapse into her arms and sob and beg her to take her home. But when she opened her mouth, nothing came out. She couldn't do it. She couldn't say the words. Because what if her mother didn't believe her? What if she took Thompson's side? What if she accused Evelyn of trying to ruin the family? Claire pulled back, studying Evelyn's face with concern. "You look tired, sweetie. Are you getting enough rest?" Evelyn nodded, forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just pregnancy stuff." Claire didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. She turned to Thompson, who was standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, watching them. "You taking good care of my girl, Thompson?" she asked with a warm smile. Thompson grinned. "Always, Claire. You know that." Claire laughed, patted him on the shoulder. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Evelyn felt like she was going to be sick. She excused herself, said she needed to lie down, and spent the rest of her mother's visit hiding in her room. That night, after Claire left, Thompson knocked on Evelyn's door. She didn't answer. "Evie," he said softly, his voice gentle, concerned. "I know things have been weird between us lately, but I want you to know that I care about you. I'd never do anything to hurt you." Evelyn closed her eyes, her hands clenched into fists. "You already did," she thought, but she didn't say it out loud. The silence stretched on for weeks. Evelyn moved through her life like a ghost, numb, hollow, barely there. She stopped talking to her friends, stopped answering their texts, stopped showing up to plans. She couldn't explain what was wrong, couldn't find the words to make them understand. And even if she could, what would she say? That her uncle, the man everyone loved and respected, had hurt her in a way that made her feel like she was dying inside. Who would believe that? So Evelyn stayed silent, and with every day that passed, the weight of that silence grew heavier, crushing her under its suffocating grip. She told herself it was easier this way, that staying quiet would make it go away, that if she just pretended it never happened, maybe eventually it wouldn't hurt so much. But silence doesn't heal wounds. Silence only protects the ones who cause them. It was a Tuesday afternoon, almost 3 months after that night, when something inside Evelyn finally broke. She was at work, shelving books in the back corner of the store, when a customer approached her. It was a woman, maybe in her 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She was holding a book about trauma recovery, and she asked Evelyn if she'd read it. Evelyn glanced at the cover, shook her head. The woman smiled softly. "It helped me," she said quietly. After what happened to me." Evelyn looked up, met the woman's eyes, and something in her expression must have given her away, because the woman reached out and gently touched her arm. "Whatever it is, honey," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "it's not your fault. And you don't have to carry it alone." The woman paid for her book and left, but her words stayed with Evelyn, echoing in her mind for the rest of the day. "It's not your fault. You don't have to carry it alone." That night, Evelyn sat in her room, staring at her phone, her hands trembling. She'd been thinking about telling someone for weeks, but she'd always talked herself out of it. But now, after that woman's words, after months of drowning in silence, Evelyn realized something. If she didn't speak up now, she never would. And if she never spoke up, Thompson would get away with it. And maybe, just maybe, he'd do it to someone else. Evelyn couldn't let that happen. So she picked up her phone, took a deep breath, and called the one person she thought might believe her, her best friend, Sarah. Sarah answered on the second ring. "Hey, Evie, what's up? I haven't heard from you in forever. Are you okay?" Evelyn's voice broke. "No," she whispered. "I'm not okay." There was a pause, and then Sarah's tone shifted, urgent, concerned. "What happened? Talk to me." And so Evelyn told her. Everything. The comments, the touches, the night that changed everything, the weeks of silence, the guilt, the shame, the fear. She cried through most of it, her words tumbling out in broken fragments. But Sarah listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't accuse. She just listened. When Evelyn finally finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Sarah said, her voice fierce and unwavering, "Evie, you need to tell your mom, and you need to tell the police." Evelyn shook her head, even though Sarah couldn't see her. "I can't. No one will believe me." "Yes, they will," Sarah said firmly. "I believe you, and your mom will believe you. And if she doesn't, then I'll be right there with you, every step of the way. You're not alone in this." Evelyn broke down sobbing. For the first time in months, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could breathe again. 2 days later, Evelyn sat down with her mother. It was the hardest conversation of her life. Claire had come over to Thompson's house to drop off some groceries, and Evelyn asked her to stay, said she needed to talk. They sat in Evelyn's room, the door closed, and Evelyn told her everything. Claire's face went through a dozen different emotions: shock, disbelief, horror, rage. At first, she didn't say anything, just sat there staring at her daughter with wide, tear-filled eyes. Then she said, her voice shaking, "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure?" Evelyn felt her heart sink. That was the question she'd been dreading. But she nodded, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I'm sure, Mom. I wouldn't lie about this." Claire covered her mouth with her hand, her entire body trembling. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I should have known, I should have seen it. I'm so sorry." Evelyn collapsed into her mother's arms, and they cried together, the kind of deep, soul-wrenching sobs that come from years of pain finally breaking free. When they finally pulled apart, Claire wiped her eyes, her jaw set with determination. "We're going to the police," she said, "right now." Evelyn hesitated. "What if they don't believe me? What if there's no evidence? What if—" Claire cut her off, her voice fierce. "I don't care. You're telling your story, and they're going to listen. And if they don't, we'll make them listen." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Evelyn gave her statement to the police, went through the humiliating process of answering questions about that night, about every detail she'd tried so hard to forget. It was exhausting, traumatizing, but Sarah and her mother were there every step of the way, holding her hand, reminding her that she was strong, that she was brave, that she was doing the right thing. Thompson was confronted. He denied everything, of course, said Evelyn was confused, that she was hormonal, that she'd misunderstood his concern for something else. He played the role of the hurt, misunderstood Uncle perfectly, and for a while, Evelyn was terrified that people would believe him. But then something unexpected happened. Another woman came forward, a cousin Evelyn barely knew, someone who lived across the country. She'd heard about the accusation, and she reached out to Evelyn privately. She told her that Thompson had done something similar to her years ago, when she was a teenager. She'd never told anyone, too scared, too ashamed. But now, hearing Evelyn's story, she found the courage to speak up. And then another woman came forward, and another. Suddenly, Evelyn wasn't alone anymore. Suddenly there was a pattern, a history, proof that this wasn't just in her head, that Thompson wasn't the man everyone thought he was. The case moved forward. It was slow, painful, filled with setbacks and moments where Evelyn wanted to give up. But she didn't. She kept going, kept fighting, kept telling her truth, because she realized something important. Speaking up wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every woman Thompson had hurt, every woman he might hurt in the future. It was about breaking the cycle of silence, of shame, of letting monsters hide behind the mask of family. 6 months later, Evelyn stood in front of a mirror, staring at her reflection. She looked different now. Older, maybe. Tired, definitely, but also stronger. She'd given birth to a healthy baby girl a few weeks earlier, and holding her daughter in her arms for the first time had been the most surreal, beautiful, heartbreaking moment of her life. Because in that moment, Evelyn made a promise. She promised that her daughter would never have to carry the weight of silence the way she had. She promised that she'd teach her to speak up, to trust her instincts, to know that her voice mattered. She promised that the cycle of shame and fear would end with her. Thompson was eventually charged. The legal process was long and complicated, and Evelyn knew there was no guarantee of justice. But she'd done her part. She'd spoken up. She'd refused to let him win. And that, in itself, was a victory. Evelyn started seeing a therapist, someone who specialized in trauma. It wasn't easy, reliving those memories, working through the pain and the guilt and the anger. But slowly, Evelyn started to heal. She learned that what happened to her wasn't her fault, that she'd done nothing wrong, that Thompson's actions were his responsibility and his alone. She learned that trauma doesn't just go away, that it's something you carry with you, but it doesn't have to define you. She learned that healing isn't linear, that there are good days and bad days, and that's okay. One afternoon, Evelyn sat down with Sarah and her mother, and they talked about everything that had happened. Claire apologized again, said she should have seen the signs, should have protected her daughter better. Evelyn shook her head. "You couldn't have known, Mom," she said softly. "He was good at hiding it. That's what people like him do. They make you trust them. They make you think they're safe. And then they use that trust to hurt you." Claire nodded, tears in her eyes. "I just wish I could have stopped it." "You did stop it," Evelyn said. "The moment I told you, you believed me. You stood by me. That's what matters." Sarah reached over, squeezed Evelyn's hand. "You're the bravest person I know," she said. Evelyn smiled, a small, sad smile. "I don't feel brave." "You are," Sarah insisted. "Because you spoke up. You broke the silence. And because of you, other women found the courage to do the same." Evelyn thought about that, about the women who'd come forward, about the ones who might still be out there, carrying their own secrets, their own pain. And she realized something. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was a story that needed to be told, a story that needed to be heard. Because for every Evelyn, there are countless others who never speak up, who never find the courage, who spend their whole lives carrying the weight of what was done to them. And that has to change. Family isn't always safe. That's a truth that's hard to swallow, especially in a world that tells us family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that we should always protect and defend the people who share our last name. But sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who cause the deepest wounds. Sometimes the monsters aren't strangers lurking in dark alleys. Sometimes they're sitting across from us at the dinner table. And the hardest part? They know how to make us doubt ourselves. They know how to make us feel like we're the ones who are wrong, like we're overreacting, like we're causing problems. They know how to use our love, our trust, our loyalty against us. That's why speaking up is so hard, but it's also why it's so important. Because silence doesn't protect us. Silence only protects them. So if you're reading this, if you're watching this, if you're someone who's been hurt by someone you trusted, please know this. It's not your fault. You didn't ask for it. You didn't deserve it. And you're not alone. There are people who will believe you. There are people who will stand by you. And there are people who will fight for you when you don't have the strength to fight for yourself. But you have to speak up. You have to break the silence. Because your voice matters. Your story matters. And the only way we stop people like Thompson is by refusing to let them hide in the shadows anymore. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, please reach out. Talk to someone you trust. Call a helpline. Go to the police. Do whatever you need to do to protect yourself. Because you deserve safety. You deserve healing. You deserve a life where you don't have to be afraid. And if you're a parent, a friend, a family member, please, please listen. When someone tells you they've been hurt, don't dismiss them. Don't make excuses. Don't protect the abuser because it's easier than facing the truth. Believe them. Support them. Stand by them. Because that's how we break the cycle. That's how we create a world where silence doesn't protect monsters anymore. Evelyn's story is one of pain, of betrayal, of the kind of darkness that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the world. But it's also a story of courage, of resilience, of a young woman who refused to let her trauma define her. It's a story that reminds us that speaking up is never easy, but it's always worth it, because silence never protects the victim. It only protects the abuser. If Evelyn's story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, leave a comment, and just type, "Justice for Evelyn." Share this video, because the more people who hear stories like this, the more people who understand the reality of abuse, the harder it becomes for abusers to hide. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week we're sharing another story that will shake you to your core. A teacher's hidden truth that shocked a small town and changed lives forever. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember this. If you feel unsafe, if you're carrying a secret that's eating you alive, if you're drowning in silence, please, please speak up. You are not alone. You are stronger than you know, and your voice, your truth, matters more than you could ever imagine. Thank you for watching. And remember, silence never protects the innocent. It only shields the guilty.